Good evening, everybody. Today, our group is going to be presenting the research on evidence-based interventions for immigration trauma in the school counseling context. Our group is composed of Beatrice Jean Luis, Urpi Jimenez, and Whitley Maxilis. Hey, this is for the research presentation assignment for course MHS 6710. So the abstract, basically, we wanted to address something that is currently happening and it's been happening for years. Families in developing countries often migrate from their countries due to war, forced exile, other circumstances. And once they migrate, families and individuals are seeking safety, better opportunities, and a higher quality of life. One of these migrating groups, which is the focus of our research proposal, is the unaccompanied refugee minors, also known as URM, or also known as unaccompanied young refugees, UYRs. We will use these two terms, okay, in different contexts. They have the highest risks of developing post-traumatic stress disorder and other psychological problems like stress and anxiety. Okay, so unaccompanied young refugees often encounter dangerous situations in their journeys, and it leads to exposure to traumatic stressors before the journey, in journey stressors, and also post-migration stressors. That means that they may have different experiences at different times in their journey to migrate to the United States, which then leads to certain issues. This highlights the need for the professional counseling and intervention in our school settings that effectively can provide ample opportunities for culturally sensitive mental health and social emotional support for UYR students. This issue frames the problem in the literature, which aims to identify the most effective strategies and interventions to better assist unaccompanied youth, refugees, UYRs, or as we mentioned before, URMs in our school systems. So this is the topic overview. We are going to have an introduction, also the goals of the project, which entail how it relates to preview work in the area, why the new research is important. We're also going to state our hypothesis. Then we will be reviewing the literature. We're going to give you a brief review of our literature, then go over to methods and implementation. Implementation includes the participants, instruments, procedures, limitations. And finally, we will look at the future research direction and conclusion of our presentation. So for the introduction, so the problems facing this group of migrants, unaccompanied refugee minors, or unaccompanied young refugees who migrate to the United States from countries vary tremendously, okay? There are factors, push and pull factors that can lead to exposure of multiple stressors in the migration trauma of this youth, which contributes to their psychosocial history and then continues to influence them into the years to come. They have the highest risk of developing post-traumatic stress disorder and other psychological problems like stress and anxiety. So just a little bit of background on the push and pull factors if you have not heard of that before. So the push factors relate to the reasons that cause the youth to migrate to the United States. So earlier in the abstract, we mentioned poverty, war, persecution, also natural disasters. Okay, so those are the push factors. They're pushing them away from their, from their home. Pull factors relate to relocation. Okay, and this could also B, due to the reunification with family that forces the youth to migrate to the United States. Okay, this could be to relocate. Sometimes their parents could be in their home country and say, you know, it's too dangerous for you to be here. You have an aunt in the United States, you need to go. Or I cannot provide for you anymore. We don't have a job. We don't have some, you know, something, you know, for you to be taken care of. You need to go. You're probably better there. And another thing is to reunify the family. Sometimes this youth come to the United States because their families have, maybe their parents have already left years prior to them leaving, and then the family has called for them to come and unify with them. Okay. So how it relates to the preview work in this area? Well, we chose this group of students because we work for Palm Beach County schools. And so in our research, we found that the amount of unaccompanied children, okay, is really high nationwide. But surprisingly, we found that Palm Beach County in particular, okay, is ranks 5th in the nation for the number of unaccompanied children released from federal custody to sponsors, which, you know, the United States is a pretty large country. And, you know, top before Palm Beach County, we have Texas, certain areas in Texas, California, and LA, Dallas, and then comes Miami-Dade, and the 5th one is Palm Beach County, which I thought it was very impressive. And so it's important for us to address this because the children are going to our schools, and we need to be prepared on how to intervene to better support their mental health, you know, and order for them to be able to achieve their academic goals and social emotional needs, as well as healing. So why is the research important? And narrowing down to Palm Beach County, this is data from 2014 to 2024 from the unaccompanied children released to sponsors by state and county, from the Migration Policy Institute. So this is data from them, and you can see the number of unaccompanied children released to sponsors in our county, which, you know, we have to be attentive about this because, again, these students are coming to our schools. Okay. If you look at 2020 and 2014, we had 5,445 students come to Palm Beach County. Unaccompanied children were released then. Then let's jump all the way to 2019, 7,408. Then the highest year was post-COVID 2022, 13,195 unaccompanied children were released to sponsors in our county, right? And now in 2024, which was the latest data numbers, we see that we had 9,487. That's still a large amount of children that we need to support, you know, and we need to be aware on how to support them and how to prepare our schools to be ready to provide this support, and also how to work with community-based, you know, organizations so we can work together to better assist these children. This is just a hypothesis that we created as we worked together in our research proposal. If school counselors implement culturally responsive evidence trauma interventions with immigrant students, in particular unaccompanied young refugees or unaccompanied refugee minors, then those students will show a significant decrease in trauma-related symptoms and an improvement in academic engagement and social emotional wellness compared to immigrant students who do not receive such services in school settings. So we do believe that by providing culturally responsive teaching practices and culturally responsive methods when working with them as counselors or as therapists or as, you know, as mental health professionals, students can benefit from that. You know, also providing them evidence trauma interventions in order for them to be able to decrease the symptoms that the migration experience may cause. So this is the introduction. We have to consider that the federal education policies in the United States guarantee the right to equal access to education for all children in the United States, regardless of citizenship or immigration status. And schools must expand how they provide education to meet the needs of immigrant students. There is an increase, as you saw in the data that was shown before. There's an increased need for schools to provide English language assistant programs for English learners. Okay, and the number grew from 4.5 million students in 2010 to 5 million in 2020 and comprised 10.3% of public school students nationwide. Now, these numbers are talking about English language learners, not just unaccompanied youth, just to clarify that. So I'm going to give the floor to Beatrice.
So the next section we're going to look at is our literature review. In our literature review, we're going to see that common sources of trauma among refugees are like physical and sexual assault, combat and war exposure, natural and man-made disasters, and crime victimizations. Our cultural stress factors, feeling of guilt for leaving family and friends behind, social isolation and loneliness, communication and language barriers, challenging finding employment and adapting to the new environment, legal status, uncertainty, and fear of deportation. To continue with our literature review, unrecognized and undersupported population, unaccompanied youth refugees, the UYRs, in schools often go unnoticed and lack sufficient support system. Prevalence of mental health challenges. Over 50% of refugees youth who experience war and forced migration suffer from high levels of anxieties. Up to 30% exhibit symptoms of post traumatic stress disorders, PTSD, and the consequences and developmental trauma is exposure to trauma during critical development stages, leading to social, educational, physical challenges.
To continue the literature review, this was a literature review on reimagining social and emotional support in schools for immigrant students. The article focuses on immigrant students and families. Okay, they experience disproportionate exposure to trauma immigration-related stress, the structural inequalities, and poor access to mental health and social services, which can lead to mental health inequities. Immigrant students and families also bring many strengths that can buffer potential negative health outcomes. Okay, they tend to be very resilient. Students that provide social and emotional development in addition to academic achievement can play a unique role in enhancing the strengths and responding to the needs of the students. The literature also discusses the school-based interventions that shows efficacy for improving mental health outcomes and focus on addressing acculturative stress among immigrant students. It also discusses social determinants of health need among immigrant students and families within schools, including the community school model applied to immigrant students and families. You can see that model on the right side of the screen. Recommendations and strategies for pediatricians and schools to be able to transform school-based supports for addressing mental health, social need, and accultural stress among immigrant students. That design is on the below the other chart of the community school model. The last review talks about Trauma Without Borders, the need for school-based interventions in treating unaccompanied refugee minors. The literature really goes in depth to explore the migration trauma about among Mexican and Central American unaccompanied refugee minors, to develop understanding of migration as a tripartite process, which means it's in three parts, right? So the students basically have traumas pre-migration. Maybe it was in war, maybe they've seen a lot of deaths or violence in their country, right? So this is prior to even going in the journey to migrate, right? So they're exposed to traumatic stressors. Then we have the in-journey stressors, right? Maybe they're crossing the border, they're being kept in confined places. Maybe they don't have a lot to eat. Maybe they even, unfortunately, there are reports of like abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, violence. And then also post-migration stressors. Once they're here, there could be stressors, if they're reuniting with their family or their parents, they don't know each other. They're under stress. The whole family is under stress because they're unifying, yet they don't know each other. So they're going through that process of getting to know each other. So the literature review talks about these components, okay, and they may act as precursors to psychological issues such as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, anxiety, and depression. The literature also states that from all the migrant groups, the unaccompanied refugee minors are the more likely to develop psychiatric symptoms. It also suggests that traumatic focused cognitive behavioral therapy, TF-CBT, cognitive behavioral intervention for trauma in schools, CBITS, and the mental health for immigrant program, MHIP, are among the most effective interventions in the treatment of PTSD, anxiety, and depression in refugee minors. The case also gives a sample that illustrates a cultural adaptation of a therapy, the TF-CBT, in an urban public high school. It also stated that often linguistic and cultural barriers, such as a stigma about the concept of therapy itself, may pose obstacles in identifying URMs and families in need. This is because, they're shy to share more about them for various reasons. School staff often misinterprets trauma-triggered behaviors in URM since they can range from irritable outbursts to internalized symptoms, which are even harder to notice, okay? Like putting their head down, sleeping a lot. In addition, it has been reported that symptoms can manifest in ways including somatic complaints such as headaches and stomach aches.
Okay, our next section is the methods. So when we began looking at our methods, we contacted the Palm Beach School District and we wanted high school students with the highest migration and the LY, which are the limited English proficient student population. We identify the school interests in participating in the qualitative research study. We prepare the appropriate budget, training, and resources for participating schools, and we focus on students in within the grades of ninth and 10th grade. And how we selected the participant, we obtain approval from the teacher and administrators to determine participating schools. We use our system with the school system, with our Palm Beach school system, which is the SIS system, which is the student information system to identify all of our LY students who may qualify for the study. And we distribute recruitment materials in classrooms. And of course, we had to get informed consent through getting it through the process of getting the contact eligible students and their guardian. We explain the research process and the purpose, and then we conduct research led discussion and presentation about the interventions. We send home the um, consent forms and participation agreement for signatures, and then, waited to get them returned from the students. And then randomized and group assignments after the consent forms and pre intervention screening results are collected. We assign selected groups of students randomly to have two different groups, Group A and Group B, within each selected schools. And then we made sure that we looked at our hypothesis, which is if school counselors implement culturally responsive, evidence-based trauma interventions with immigrant students, in particular unoccupied young refugees UIRs, or unoccupied refugee minors, which is UFMs, then these students will show a significant decrease in trauma related symptoms and improvement in academic engagement and social emotional wellness compared to immigrant students who do not receive such services in school setting. And then we had three different questions. So our question number one is, how do UIRs slash UFM describe their experiences with culturally responsive trauma informed counseling intervention? Our question number two, what barriers and facilitators do students and counselors identify in implementing these intervention? And our last question, question number three, in what ways do students perceive changes in their academic and social emotional life after participating in their interventions? All right. So within our methods, we had two groups. Group A, perceived skills for learning and life. So that's our SSL group lessons for, for the first 15 minutes of class. Participant um, participated weekly in cultural adjustment and trauma service, which is a CAT sections led by a mental health professional, received outreach services, included parent training and therapy outside of school, attend weekly check ins, and school counselors and mental health professionals to assess progress and implementation quality, and then complete pre and post to measure intervention effectiveness. That's our group A. Our group B continue with a standard classroom instruction, receive required SLL lessons from classroom teachers, and the implementation support provide classroom teachers with training and ongoing support to deliver the SLL lessons and conduct interventions throughout the entire school year. In our data collection and assessment over the duration of a year was the study. We used the screener before pre intervention 1 week prior, 1 week before the pre intervention. We administered the child in an adolescent trauma screener, which is called the CATS, and the patient health questionnaire, and and also to assess the baseline trauma and the depressive symptoms. So we did that. We used the pre-intervention trauma symptom checklist for children. In doing the intervention, we use open-ended survey questions, and then the post-intervention, 2 weeks after the end of the study, we administer the trauma symptom checklist for children to measure post traumatic stress and related psychological symptoms. We use open ended survey questions, and then we compare pre and post results to evaluate intervention effectiveness. And now Whitley is going to go over the participation.
Hello, everybody. Okay, so for participation, we will really focus on high school students in grades 9 and 10, and really being students who are identified as English language learners on SIS, just like Beatrice mentioned before. Um, we will use SIS to also look for when those students entered the United States schools to narrow down the population to the most recent newcomers in the high school institution. And we will translate every single form of communication and the student and parent language so that they can understand the process of the study and be able to really understand what what the study will be about. Every single thing that they'll be taking part of in the study and signing consent. So everything will be done in their own language, including and as well as English. Now we're going to move on to the instrument. Just like Beatrice mentioned before, I'm just going to go a little bit deeper on each one of them. So first we have the child and adolescent trauma screen, which is also known as the CAT. It was developed by Lutz Goldbeck and Lucy Berliner. It is a 40-item assessment that measures traumatic event and post-traumatic stress symptoms. It is administered to children aged 3 to 17, and it takes approximately 15 minutes to administer this assessment or this test. So for children aged 3 to 6, it is scored. Um, Now we're talking about the scoring. The total symptom score is calculated by summing the score for items 1 to 16, ranging from 0 to 48, and for individuals age 7 to 17, the total symptom score is calculated by summing the raw score for items 1 to 20, ranging from of 0 to 60. And according to a study conducted by Saster and colleagues in 2017, um, this has been proven to have good to excellent reliability and medium to strong validity. This is an example of the assessment of the child and adolescent trauma screen For age 3 to 6, as you can tell, they have, serious type of questions like if the child have experienced serious or natural disasters, ever experienced being slapped, punched by family members or non-family members, and they would answer yes or no. On the left side, we have just how the scoring is interpreted. So if the score for a 3-year-old is higher than 16, then they would be in the green, and lower, which would be, so the higher it is, the more severe the case is for age 7 through 3 to 17. So next we have the Patient Health Questionnaire 9, PHQ 9. This one was developed by Robert L. Spitzer, Janet B.W. Williams, and Kurt Kroenke. It is a 9-item test used for screening and monitoring depression in individuals age 13 and older. And it can be completed individually or with the assistance of a mental health professional. It takes about 2 to 5 minutes to administer the test. And for scoring, the PH9, we basically sum up the responses for a total of 0 to 27, and then the higher the score, the more severe the case is. And according to Sun et al., 2020, the reliability is moderate to good, as well as the validity. We can move on. And it was also compared to other assessments, and that's how it was. They were able to find the validity, and as well as a retest reliability of 0.5 and 0.7. That shows moderate to strong. And this is an example of this test. And one of the things that we see is how they test how an individual basically have felt over the past 2 weeks. So as they're reading each statement and deciding from 0 to 3, they're really looking into how they have felt over, not just for the day, but over the last 2 weeks. And the last one that we're going to talk about is the Trauma Symptom Checklist for Children, which is also known as the TSCC. It was published in 1996 by John Briere. It is a 54-item test that is designed to assess post-traumatic stress and related psychological symptoms in children and adolescents ages 8 to 16. It can be administered in approximately 15 to 20 minutes. And scoring this, and it measures anxiety, depression, anger, post-traumatic stress, dissociation, and sexual concerns. Scoring this test, it would be by summing each of the 54 items on a 0 to 3 scale, and the higher would basically signal a significant distress. So the higher the score is, the more significant the case would be. And it is also shown to be good to excellent with it is a reliable test. And this is an example of what the kit looks like. Now we're going to go into the procedures and the agreement and requirements. So just like we said before, it is very important for us to have the parental or guardian and the student's consent for participation. And they also have to be willing to understand and be willing to participate in this year-long study. For requirement, as we said before, they would have to be LY students, and we would check that through our system. And they must participate or must attend no less than 95% of our activities in the experiment. And they have to be willing to complete open-ended questionnaires that provides feedback on their experiences, feelings, and beliefs. So we do have our two groups, and which would be selected based on the randomization selection process. We would have the group A, who would receive, any student that ends up in this group would receive all services, which are the cultural adjustment and trauma services, which is also known as the CATS. The CAT is a comprehensive school-based mental health program that provides outreach service through cultural brokers and mediators. They would also receive the skills for learning and life, which is also known as the SLL. They would have family services, which would include parent training, family therapy, family strengthening techniques. They would have individual services like supportive services, psychoeducational, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is also known as the CBT, and trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy, which is also known as the TFCBT. They would also have supports from clinicians, which would be there to help link the students and families to community services and provide support to the family. Where we also have the group B, who would get, the regular services that the schools would provide, which at this point, the Skills for Life and Learning is one of the recommended curriculum or services that the school provide, and all teachers are required to provide this type. So they would still receive the Skill for Life and Learning and everything else, and they would continue as regular students in the school district. So this one we've already talked about, so I'm going to go briefly up when it comes to the assessment. So 1 week before the assessment, we would have a pre-screener, just to be able to identify the participants and who would need further assessment, and those who would participate in the study. So we would look at the LY students and provide this pre-screener so we can identify students in need. And from there, we can continue with our selection process. Then we would have the pre-intervention. Those students will take a pre-test, which is the trauma symptoms checklist for children, the TSCC, to identify which participant shows signs of PTSD and related symptoms. And during the intervention, we would have the open-ending survey questions that they would, participate in, to gather qualitative data on specific traumatic experiences, and for with the post, which would be done 2 weeks after the end of the study, they would take the TSCC as well as answer further, more open-ended survey questions. Yeah. Okay, so going into how we would analyze this data, we would use the thematic analysis, which is one of the widely used methods to analyze qualitative data. It is structured but flexible, and it allows researchers to identify, analyze, interpret patterns and meaning within a data set. And the way that this is done, you would start first by familiarizing with the data, by rereading and reading the data, generalizing initial codes, searching for themes within the data, reviewing the themes, defining and naming themes, and then writing a report at the end. And just like we said before, those are the two post assessments that we would use this type of analysis for, which would be the trauma symptom checklist for children, and as of course the open-ended survey questions. This goes a little bit more, just provides more information about this thematic analysis step. I'm not going to go too much into it because of time, but it really gives more information about each step and how each one of them can be done to really analyze the data. Now we're going to talk about the limitation. So in research, we at this point are lacking evidence-based intervention specifically tailored to the population that we are speaking about, the UIRs, with factual data to support more effective implementation. And it's one of the things that's important to even in the school system to like teachers or professionals are not really aware of those students backgrounds or being able to connect with them, and understand their background experiences, to really educate them and support them the way that they need to. There is a lack of research regarding their long-term integration outcome. For example, there's a lack of research when it comes to those individuals becoming adults and learning about their employments and health improvement, or maybe they didn't improve and we don't have that type of data. In the schools, the school professionals lack the appropriate training and expertise to assist refugee and immigrants children in coping with their trauma. Sometimes those students leave their parents in their current homes, and they join with grandparents and aunts and uncles and other family members who they have never met and are not as committed to their education as their parents would. And these are the limitations in schools. And for students, one of the main things that we notice that those students a lot of the times are absent, and it's not because they want to be absent from school, but because they have so many struggles that they're facing, like with family instability, frequent relocation, um, responsibilities of caring for their younger siblings. And then there's the staggered migration when parents migrate to a new country um, years before their children. So when they come to the country before their children comes after, there tend to be, some struggles there too. And I'm going to pass it along to Beatrice.
So I'm gonna discuss the future research direction and conclusion. So the study will contribute to the limited body of research focusing on unoccupied youth refugees, your UYRs, and the effectiveness of intervention designed to support them. The findings may inspire other researchers to implement and expand upon the proposed strategies. If proven successful, and to explore additional intervention methods for working with URLs. So if it's successful, then you're going to see more of it being conducted, and we'll see more interventions for our students that really need it. The growing population of the UYRs in local communities remain underrepresented and underserved. So it highlighting a critical gap in current educational and mental health practices. Many mental health professionals and educators lack awareness and training regarding the psychological and emotional impact of migration of youth. So they need more training to be able to support that population. The research aims to increase awareness and provide practical evidence based strategies that professionals can apply in school and community setting to support your UYRs. Future studies could consider conducting longitudinal research to assessing the long term effects and to identify areas of improvement.
So more on future research direction and our conclusion. Based on ongoing findings, researchers can develop new or refined strategies to address evolving needs and ensure this population achieve success and wellness. Okay. Greater awareness and application of evidence-based interventions will increase the likelihood that the school professionals and communities deliver effective supports for this population. So the future research should also explore, investigate the influence of language barriers on the outcomes of interventions. We also looked into the role of the cultural stigma surrounding mental health of refugee communities, and the impact of inadequate training for counselors and educators in multicultural trauma, which is also a concern, right? Continue the investigation of multimodal therapeutic approaches, such as the integration of trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, which is, it's in our research has shown that it's super effective. And some of the methods that we can do this is with art or movement-based therapies that can strengthen the foundation for comprehensive trauma treatment in school settings. And with that, we conclude. And these are just the pages of our references of our long and interesting research proposal. And we thank you for viewing. The end.